Hello everyone, and welcome to Model Walk Explained. Today's story is called 12 Types of Regret. Our model portrays Claire, the deputy editor of a women's magazine in Hong Kong. Claire had always believed that leaving Damien was the best decision she had made at the age of 28. 7 years later, while preparing a magazine feature about the choices people regretted most, she saw his name on the list of interviewees. She assumed he would say that his greatest regret was failing to stop her from leaving. Only after the recording ended did she discover the truth. What Damien truly regretted was once promising that he would never become a burden in her life. Because of that promise, he had chosen to let her go. Claire was 35 and worked as the deputy editor of a women's magazine in Hong Kong. She had written about marriage, infidelity, divorce, and starting again. Her greatest skill was turning other people's wounds into elegant headlines. Readers often described her as clear-headed, as though she were a woman who had never fallen in love with the wrong person. Only Claire knew that being clear-headed sometimes meant having a memory that refused to fade. The magazine's anniversary feature was called If You Could Begin Again. The editorial team invited 12 people to discuss 12 different kinds of regret. One regretted marrying too young. Another regretted never having children. Someone else regretted abandoning a career for love. The 12th interviewee was Damien. When her assistant placed his profile on her desk, Claire stared at his photograph for a long time. He was thinner than he had been 7 years earlier. There were several new lines around his eyes. His occupation had also changed. He was no longer an advertising director. He now worked as a documentary filmmaker. Claire could easily have assigned the interview to another journalist. Instead, she closed the file and said, "Book him for Thursday." Damien arrived on time. He wore a dark grey shirt and still had the same old watch on his wrist. They had once been together for 6 years. When they were 22, they were so poor that even a date required careful planning around MTR fares and interchange stations. Damien made student films. Claire wrote articles for a small online publication. They lived together in a rooftop flat above an old tenement building in Sham Shui Po. During summer, the room became as hot as a metal box. Yet, they could still spend half an hour laughing over something as trivial as who should shower first. Later, Claire was promoted. Damien also began receiving advertising work. His working hours became longer, while his temper became increasingly quiet and heavy. When Claire returned home, Damien was editing footage. By the time he finished work, she was already asleep. There was no affair. There were no dramatic arguments. Their relationship simply became like a bowl of soup left uncovered in the fridge, losing a little more of its flavour every day. On the night of Claire's 28th birthday, she ate the entire cake alone. Damien returned home at 3 a.m. When he saw the burnt-out candles on the table, he stood still for a long time. Claire looked at him. "Do you still want to marry me?" He did not answer. He merely said, "I'm really tired at the moment." At that moment, Claire understood that some answers were not contained in words. Sometimes, the answer was found in how long a person remained silent. She moved out the following day. Damien did not follow her. 3 months later, he sent her a message, wishing her a happy birthday. He had forgotten that her birthday had already passed, 90 days earlier. When the interview began, both of them were painfully polite. Claire switched on the recorder. "What is the decision you regret most in your life?" Damien looked at the recording device. "I once promised someone that I would never become a burden to her." Claire's fingers stopped moving across her notebook. He had made that promise when they were 25. At the time, Claire had been offered an overseas posting. She turned it down because she could not bear to leave him. Damien held her and promised that he would always allow her to be free. He would never become the reason she gave up her future. Claire had always assumed that he eventually kept that promise. "Do you believe you held her back?" she asked. "No," Damien replied. "I regret believing that love meant never disturbing someone." On the day Claire left, Damien had been standing inside the entrance of the old tenement building. He watched her load her suitcases into a taxi. He had considered running after her. Then he remembered the promise he had made. He had promised that he would never stand in the way of her life. At the time, he believed that letting her go was an act of respect. Years later, he finally understood. Respect did not mean doing nothing. It meant at least asking whether she truly wanted to leave. Claire switched off the recorder Does asking now make any difference? Damien raised his eyes towards her. Do you want to leave? Rain had begun to fall outside. Their reflections appeared in the glass, two middle-aged faces looking back at them. They were no longer the young couple who had lived in a rooftop room and believed that love could solve everything. Claire did not answer. After Damien, she had dated two men. One was too passionate. The other was almost excessively dependable. Whenever either relationship approached marriage, she remembered Damien's silence. She had always assumed that she was afraid of making the same mistake again. In truth, some part of her had simply been waiting for the words he had failed to say. Damien opened his bag and took out a photograph. Claire was 24 in the picture. She was crouching beside the sea, in Saikung, holding a reflector for him, while the wind threw her hair across her face. On the back, Damien had written a single sentence. "When I finish this film, we'll get married." He never finished the film. "I'm going to Iceland next month," Damien said. "I may stay there for several years." Claire smiled. "So you came here to say goodbye?" "I came to ask whether you want to come with me." Claire had waited 7 years to hear those words. Now that they had finally arrived, they did not restore the courage she once possessed. Instead, they brought only a gentle, almost comforting tiredness. She looked at him. "If I refuse, will you regret asking?" Damien shook his head. "At least this time?" I asked. Claire remained silent for a long time. Then she pushed the photograph back across the table. "I'm not going." Damien nodded. He did not look disappointed, nor did he try to persuade her. He stood, put on his jacket, and paused beside the door. "How will you write the interview?" Claire answered. "I'll write about a man who regretted not asking someone to stay, and a woman who regretted waiting too long to be asked." Damien smiled and quietly closed the door behind him. After the anniversary issue was published, the interview became the magazine's most widely shared article. Readers left thousands of comments, asking whether Claire and Damien eventually found their way back to each other. Claire never answered. Some regrets do not mean that we wish to begin again. Sometimes, regret simply allows us to admit that the person we once were had already done everything they could. Claire did not travel to Iceland with Damien. She did not wait for him to return either. 1 month later, she applied for an overseas position that she had been too frightened to accept for years. As the plane left Hong Kong International Airport, Victoria Harbour gradually became a small patch of grey-blue light beneath the clouds. Claire thought about the true nature of regret. The deepest regret in life was not choosing the wrong person. It was losing someone, yet continuing to leave the rest of your life standing in the same place, guarding a door that had already closed. At last, she understood that Damien was not the person she truly needed to leave behind. She needed to say goodbye to the version of herself who had spent years waiting for someone else to choose her. She had waited long enough. That brings today's Hong Kong romantic story to an end. What do people regret most after a relationship ends? Is it leaving too early, failing to ask someone to stay, or spending too many years waiting for an answer? If you enjoyed this 4K yoga pants model shoot, emotional love story, and cinematic fashion video, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on notifications. That way, you will never miss our latest model shoots, fashion films, and original romantic stories. Thank you for watching. We look forward to seeing you again in the next video.